I'm John Seddon, welcome. We're going to start here.
I've never had so many letters of compliment and thank yous really. More in the last 6 weeks than I've had since the sort of 13 years that I've been here.
Just makes your day go easier. Makes you feel better about yourself because you know you're helping someone at the end of the day.
Now, when we have an unhappy customer, it's an exciting thing to think, how can we turn this customer around and bring them on board, and we do it, and it's actually not a fear anymore, it's actually exciting.
Before we were sort of coming in and just doing everything, just getting the closes, following processes. You didn't really have to have that much of your own mind because everything was set out in process for you. Whereas now, I actually have to think. And I have to work out what's the best for the customers.
And when you've got people thinking, good things happen. Not everything we do is the right thing, but what we can do is we think about, was that right or wrong? And we can make a decision to improve. So you've just lifted your workforce to a new level, and you haven't paid them anymore, and you haven't recruited any more people. So it's a pretty cool thing.
What I find better about my job is that my say actually matters. Before, I might have thought of something that needed to change or something that might have been better, but what I said didn't really matter. But now it does, and I'm able to give my opinion and help things change for the better, and I really enjoy that.
If I were to take leaders into places where people behave that way, typically the leaders would say, oh, they must have been empowered. Been on empowerment programs. I remember the first empowerment program I saw was in IBM in the 1990s. People would go away for a week to learn how to be empowered, and the last session on the program was, this is how to prepare for a negotiation with your boss. Or they might think, oh, these people have been on an engagement program, same shit, different colour. I mean, the point is this, that no, they haven't, nothing. They often say, what did you do to the people? And the answer is nothing, nothing. When you think about the phrase command and control, we tend to focus on the command word. The problem must be that bosses are being too bossy and making all the decisions. Actually, we should concentrate on the control word. It's our theories of control that we've got to change. So what's happening in those examples that, sure, the people are popping and they're doing good work and their brains are at work, and it's because the managers have changed their theories of control. If you go on an empowerment program and you're encouraged to make the same decisions that the managers used to make, you're dead, basically, because it's the decisions that are the problem. The theories of control that are the problem. Well, there are many people who've crossed this Rubicon, and you'll see a lot of them here today. When you change a theory of control, you get the most extraordinary improvements in performance. Most extraordinary. I mean, you're going to see improvements that you never would have had, never would have countenanced in a conventional plan. And in fact, the change that we're talking about today requires no plan. That's a spooky idea, isn't it? But it's true. So before I talk about changing theories of control, let's define command and control. And this is how we define it. It's got quite a lot of components, each of which has its own clear operational definition. But we've been defining command and control this way for quite some time now, as articulated for a long time in the books and so on. Notice that budget management is central to command and control, and indeed budget management is a central means of control in our organisations. And you'll be hearing today that it's actually a dysfunctional means of control. The people in the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable describe it as an illusion of control. And actually, budget management makes performance worse. So it's a very, very good case for stopping behaving like that, isn't there? I don't know whether you know this. I like collecting bits of trivia, Who invented budget management? a certain James McKinsey, 100 years ago, and he solved an apparent problem for Alfred Sloan, who was running General Motors, and General Motors was an amorphous mass of organizations. Nobody really understood what was making money and what wasn't making money. And so they introduced this idea of budget management to achieve a certain kind of control, and it appeared to solve a problem for Alfred Sloan. It subsequently became normal for managers to, prior to that time, we never managed with a budget. Now it is normal for everyone to manage with a budget. I was just, given that managing with a budget is a dysfunctional thing to do, I know that's heretical, but you'll see why as we go through the day. I was just chatting to somebody I was in a county council a few weeks ago, and would you believe they had no less than 100 fully trained, qualified accountants spend every month going out and finding out, whether we're on budget or off budget and talking about stuff. What an incredible waste of public money. So we see when we change our theories of control, as you will see, then you don't need all of this malarkey and playing about with budgets because you've got knowledge as opposed to the kind of thing that you have if you manage through the budget. A man called Bauer was the man who built McKinsey into the force that it is today around the world. And he was interviewed by journalist Peter Day on the In Business program a few years ago. And I remember listening, Peter Day said to Bauer, he said, well, what's your greatest regret in management? You're now in the 21st century. And his answer was the prevalence of command and control. There we are. And what does McKinsey sell? That's a rhetorical question. So I'm going to give you 3 examples. These are 3 general examples for changing our theories of control. The first is what I would call industrialized services. So this is the idea that we put service work into call centers and back offices, and we measure people's activity, how many things they do. We standardize the work, we specialize the work, we have targets for meeting activities and sometimes meeting sales. We have service level agreements and that kind of thing. Do you recognize this? Do you have in your organization something that looks a bit like that? Well, some of you do. I'm sure you'll be familiar with this. It's kind of everywhere. Why did we hit upon this idea that we can move work to call centers? Well, of course, it was because along came some technology called the automated call distribution system. This is in the 1980s. And, like with all technology, big promise, well, you can turn all your switches and you can route your calls to a place where you can hire cheap labor and they can do the telephone work. And command and control thinkers think, oh, rock and roll, because they're obsessed with managing cost. And so they think that's going to give us a lower transaction cost. Brilliant. Why do we have back offices? Same thing. So by this stage, we've got our call centers. And in those days, those of you are old enough to remember, the call center work was you take the call, and then when you finish the call, you've got to deal with stuff to sort out the customer. That's called wrap time in old call center speak. And the trouble is, the bloody customers are still ringing in while you're doing your wrap time, interrupting you. So if you take the call, you haven't finished this. So this American, and most bad management ideas come from America, this American said, what we need to do is decouple the customer from the production part of the service. And hence the back office. When I was a boy, nobody talked about back offices, and now they're everywhere, and we kind of behave like the back office is a normal thing. So the idea was to decouple the customer, so now we can sweat the labor, get the buggers working all day. And we use, factory-type language to describe what a back office should be doing and how to schedule work, all of that. So you recognize the idea, okay? And it's everywhere. Now, the problem is, if you've got an industrialized service like that, it will be creating failure demand, okay? failure demand. Demand caused by a failure to do something or do something right for a customer. Failure demand is a concept that's very easy to understand. Cost thinkers can understand it. Oh my God, look at the cost. Sometimes, actually, I mean, here's a true story, and this kind of shows you the measure of some managers. Failure demand, easy idea to understand, easy to go and measure. So somebody got the idea in financial services, went out and took a view of how much there is, went back to boss and said, you know, boss, about 40% of the demand coming into our organisation is failure demand. And boss said, well, that's all right, that's probably about normal for our industry. With leaders like that, eh? Huh. So command and control thinkers get the idea, but do you know what they do? They move to, well, it's the bloody people. If these bloody people would just do as they should, if they would follow their processes, or maybe we need to rewrite that processes, then we wouldn't have the failure demand. And they're wrong. I know there's people here today from the health service, and there's a fellow, Roy Lilly, who blogs about the health service, and a couple of days ago in his daily blog, he said, we should follow John Seddon's idea of failure demand, and the way we should deal with NHS Direct is put medical people, doctors and nurses into NHS Direct, and that will cut out the failure demand. And you think, oh God, you know, how many times have I seen this? Wrong, wrong, wrong. He just jumped to a solution. You'll see today that what you've got to do is understand what the demand is, what the value demand is. And if you want to understand that in the health service, you don't just study it coming into NHS Direct, you study all of the demand in the geography, because you know what you're going to find, we know what you're going to find, is the same people are hitting different parts of the system. Might come back to some of these things on health. So what causes failure demand? Well, the answer is all of it. It's the industrial design that creates the failure demand. If you've got a front office and a back office, you've got two views of the customer, one based on being in front of a customer, one based on following rules. If you measure people's activity and make that a constraint on what they do, then it won't deal with the variety of demand, and that will create failure demand. If you standardize the work, that will stop you dealing with the variety of demand, and that will create failure demand. If you specialize the work, that means more handovers, and that will create more failure demand. It's systemic. You won't get rid of it until you change the system. So what are the things you've got to do? Now, there are three things that are essential for control of service systems. There's a lot more besides, but there's three things I want you to worry about. That is understanding demand, and now I'm talking about understanding value demand, why we're here, what people want from us. Understanding the value work, the things we've got to do just to do what they want, and measuring achievement of purpose. And you'll see in all of these examples and throughout the day, if you are running your organization with knowledge of those three things, you'll have control. You will also have massive performance improvement. Okay, so how does this work in a simple, call center, back office world? Well, the back office will disappear. It will disappear. Fine. What you're going to do is you're going to understand demand coming into the system, now the value demand, this is what customers want from us, and that is going to enable you to teach the people who are going to work at the front of that system how to build the expertise in there to give customers what they want. See, it's one of the things you're going to learn today. The secret of good service is give people what they need. That's it. We're going to worry about equipping them to do that value work. So demand the value work. We're going to measure achievement of purpose. What do most customers want when they call a call centre? Is they want their issue dealt with. So how can we increase the number of things we can deal with at that point of transaction? And that's a key measure. There are some things, like if you've got a computer to fix or whatever, that you can't deal with in a call centre. So you worry about these people with having the expertise to pass that work cleanly to whoever it is who's got to go out and do stuff, and you measure that in terms of achievement of purpose from a customer's point of view, which might be delivered on time, and it might be end-to-end time. You do not constrain people with measures of activity. You measure the actual time it takes to do stuff. Because as you learn to solve more problems, the actual time will go up. And as you get smarter at solving problems, the actual time will go down. And that's fine, because now you can do better quality resource planning. You are training people against demand. This cuts the training time down to 2 weeks rather than 8 weeks typically in financial services. They go to work confident, equipped. They learn if they've got things that they're not trained for yet, because you train them in the most frequent things, stuff we're going to get a lot of. So as they get things they're not trained for, they don't pass it on, they pull help. So now they've got a job where they go to work every day, they serve customers, and they learn how to serve more customers. Isn't that cool? Compare that world, which is what you saw with those people, with the old world, which is some arsehole sitting in a glass box down the end of the corridor and only turns up when his activity stats are not good. And you know, HR department will tell you the job of a manager is coach. But they're still beating you up for the wrong reasons. Okay? So there's an example. It's the theory of control that gives you people like that and radically improves your performance. So to give you an example of this, when we first met Aviva in 2010, they were planning to bring all their calls back from India because they, followed the herd, outsourced to India for lower transaction costs. Well, they recognised this as a mistake because they're having problems with customer losses. It wasn't working. They had 500 people in India, 200 people in the UK, and they had a plan to repatriate all those calls. So you could imagine if you think this way and you've got a plan, then you're going to hire about another 500 odd people in the UK. We said, best thing to do, put the plan away, study this, redesign it, build the design I've just described to you. The consequence of that was they got to handle all calls in the UK with 300 people. Who'd have put that in a plan? We currently have 700. We're going to improve the quality of service, and we're going to do it with 300. Okay? So you don't need a plan. What this will teach you when you get knowledge is you know what direction you're going to go in. All right so far? Wasn't that simple? So a second example. There are a lot of people here today from organisations that we would describe as break-fix systems. For us, it's an archetype. We're going to talk about break-fix systems a little more extensively through the day. One such example is housing repairs. Basically, in housing repairs, which is this is typical of a break-fix design, a customer calls in, or in this case a tenant calls in, and there's someone at the front end who decides what it is that's the problem and what needs to be done. And then that is passed to, in this case, a tradesperson, usually electronically, and it says this is what's to be done, these are materials that you need, and this is how long it's going to take you. Okay, so this is very simple. Also in housing repairs, because it's public sector, the repairs have targets associated with them. Very often in the private sector, there are service level agreements in place that things have to be done by certain times. So a similar arbitrary measure. And then, off you go. You think with a system like that, what could possibly go wrong, wouldn't you? One of the ways I like to introduce this is when I'm with finance people. You see, everyone can understand housing repairs because we've all got properties. It's all very understandable, logical. So I explain what I've just explained to you to finance directors in the private sector, and I give them the budget data for an organisation. And top big items on the budget data: the cost of the tradespeople, and the cost of the people in the call centre. And then the cost of materials that we're using to fix properties. And then you go down, quite a long way down in terms of rank order. Now we're talking about, the money on the vehicles, money for servicing the vehicles, that kind of stuff. And then lots of tiddly things. So I give this to the finance directors and say, well, here's the situation, here's the budget. I want you to radically reduce the costs of this service, and if possible without damaging the service, or if you can, improve it. And what always tickles me is they whip out their pencils, dive straight in. They know how to look at numbers, and they come back with ideas like, well, what we need to do, John, is get the tradespeople to work harder. If they do more jobs per day, that'll do it. That'll do it, that's what we need. Oh, no, what we'll do is we'll get rid of the people in the call centre and we'll give the tenants an app. Because tenants like apps, you know, so they can do the boom. And that'd be it. We don't need a call centre. That'd be cheaper. Of course, we've got to spend some money on building the app, but we don't worry about that. That's an investment, that is, because we're going to save money down the line. Or they say, oh, look, material costs. We've got to control material costs, so let's go and buy in bulk so we get them cheaper. That's a smart idea. Or let's make it more difficult for the tradespeople to get materials. That'll really stop them wasting our money on materials. And so on, you know, these are the ideas they come up with. They don't express them in quite the way I did, but these are the ideas they come up with. And what I know is that nothing of those ideas is going to help them. In fact, they're going to make the system worse. So let's go back to the things we need to understand. Demand. See, by the end of this, I'm going to say, what are the three things? And you're going to say, well, the first one, John, is demand, okay? What do these people understand about demand? And the answer is nothing. They can tell you the number of jobs they did last year, but they can't tell you the number of problems they had to fix in houses. Okay? Same issue in the health service. You walk into an NHS trust and they can tell you how many transactions or treatments they did last year. And if you say, that's very interesting, how many patients have you got? They don't know. See, because I know the same thing is happening with housing repairs in the NHS. It's the same people keep coming back because the system is ineffective. We're not all looking at it that way. How dumb is that? What do I know about achievement of purpose in customer terms? Well, we've got these targets, John, and we're achieving all our targets. Yeah, but, you know, customers aren't interested in targets. Customers are interested in fixing stuff. So, you know, how long does it take from when they first put their hand up until when we fixed it and we make them go and measure that and they get a shock? Because from the target data it looks tickety-boo, but the actual true end-to-end time is much longer. Another measure of achievement of purpose is, you know, the leaders have to go out with the tradesmen, and every job they walk into, the question is simply, can the tradesman fix it? Like now. And the answer is we can only do that less than 40% of the time. Oh shit. Why don't we know these things? Well, because we know these things. This is the knowledge we have of the system. And what about the value work, which is, you know, understand what's wrong and fix it? Well, the way we do understand what's wrong is we have someone who doesn't understand the plumbing talking to somebody else in a call centre who doesn't understand the plumbing, who gives a specification of what you've got to do to someone who does understand the plumbing. Are you ever going to get that right? And the second bit is fix it. Well, you learn when they go in to fix it that very often the thing on their PDA is not the job in front of them. They've often got a time on the PDA they've got to work to that they can't do, so they'll close the job and open it up again when they get the right job. It appears to meet targets, doesn't it? You know? They haven't got the materials that they need, so they have to scurry off to buy materials, and these are the people that are your productive resource. It's completely bonkers, isn't it? So you redesign it. Same principles. Let's understand the demand. If we understand the demand from a group of properties, that enables us to do two things. We can give the tradespeople the expertise to go fix stuff that we know is going to happen a lot, and we make sure they've got the materials that they're going to need to go and fix the stuff that's going to happen a lot. When they haven't got something that they need, because it's going to happen, we don't have them scurry off to B&Q to buy one. We get it brought to them so they can stay fixing stuff. We measure achievement of purpose. There are now housing organisations, there's one here today, Flagship, who are able to deliver repairs to tenants on the day and at the time a tenant wants. And that's what they measure. How cool is that? You know, if BT could do that, we'd all cheer, wouldn't we? And they're purchasing materials at the rate they're using them. Counterintuitive, isn't it? Because, and you're in the public sector, and private sector does the same. Whitehall would say, well, the way you get cheaper materials is club together and buy them cheaper. Wrong. You should be buying materials at the rate you use them. This drives the cost out, because you go from fixing stuff less than 40% of the time to fixing it pretty much all the time when you turn up. And you've always got the materials that you need because you understand the demand, and you're purchasing materials at the rate you're using them. You get a much higher quality service, dramatically lower costs. Simples. Third example. Of all of the money we spend on public services, approximately 40% of it goes on what we call people-centred services. So we're talking about health, care, a lot of police work, fire service work, voluntary sector, all sorts. These are people whose lives have fallen off the rails, okay? And we've learned not to see them as just homeless or just drug addicts or just criminal, whatever it is. Because if we're looking at it that way, this started for us. We go and work in benefits, for example, and we go and work in homelessness, and we discover we're meeting the same people. And then you start working with the police, you start seeing the people. Well, it makes sense to see them as people we need to serve rather than having lots of different ways to serve them, or actually not serve them. You'd think, wouldn't you, in a civilized society, if your life fell off the rails and you put your hand up for help from the state, someone from the state will pop along, find out what's wrong, and help you. You'd think that, wouldn't you? And that's not what happens, you see, because we've industrialized the design. What happens is you can get more than a dozen people turning up at your house, filling in essentially the same forms, asking essentially the same questions, looking at you through their specialist lens, worried about protecting their budgets, so they set thresholds. Are you serious enough for us to warrant spending our money on you? They meet their activity targets by closing cases and passing them on, so that's why you get more and more people coming through your property. If you're lucky enough to get a service delivered by somebody in this regime, they will deliver a service that's standardised, because the government believes in commissioning. So you go out to a market to get prices for service. You can only get a price if you standardise the service, and what you learn when you study it is the standardised service doesn't meet the variety of demand. So we've done all of that, and we've not got a very effective service. So people represent this as failure demand. They go through the same assessments again. They might be offered the exact same thing they were offered the last time around. And if they have the temerity to say, no, I did that, and it didn't help me, then they get labelled as difficult. This is the reality of public services today. The narrative that you'll hear on TV and the radio is that people are getting older, demand is rising, so who's going to pay? You've heard this, haven't you? The truth is, of all of this money that we spend, it's probably the largest amount of money from our public sector coffers, and a lot of it, the large majority of it, is spent ineffectively. Now, if you're a politician, which narrative would you prefer to speak about? How do you design a service that works? You understand demand. In this case, demand teaches you that what you need is someone with the capacity to go and listen and understand. And the value work is turn up. Turn up. Everybody, regardless of what the need is, turn up and listen to them and find out who they are and find out what their context is, what's going on around them. Having understood that, help them define what a good life looks like in their terms. Having done that, help them understand what they could do to take responsibility for achieving their end. And having done that, work out what resources you might provide from the community, from the voluntary sector, from the state, wherever, in order to help them achieve their end. The consequence is that many lives are quickly back on the rails and the costs fall dramatically. Now, this is such an important subject, we're going to devote a bit of time to this afternoon. But it's the same principles at work. We must understand the demand. That will dictate the way we approach the value work, and we've got to focus on just doing the value work, and we've got to measure achievement of purpose in customer terms. And in this case, that means getting people's lives back on the rails. So this is, if you like, what Beyond Command and Control looks like. The Vanguard method is a method to get you there. You're going to hear this a lot today. You have to unlearn as well as learn. You can't go and do the stuff on the right here and just think you can fit it alongside what you're currently doing. You'll hear this quite clearly today. You've got to take away the stuff you're currently doing and replace it with the stuff on the right. That's what makes for success. And that's what these people have been doing.
The great thing about Vanguard is it actually focuses on customer value. What that means is that we've delivered some absolutely brilliant results, particularly around our net promoter scores, where we've seen some huge improvements, but more importantly in reducing down the demand that you don't actually want, which is the failure demand. And that means that when the customers call us, we deal with things without handoffs and straight away. And that has seen some fantastic results.
The results have truly spoken for themselves in this organisation, and we are delivering a better service to our communities. And the performance that the service has experienced in terms of the reduction in calls and the reduction in fire deaths over the last 2 years have been historical.
The benefits to our bottom line, we believe, are around 100 million.
The Vanguard method has allowed us to take out of the organisation in the last 2 years £2 million worth of savings, but without impacting our frontline service delivery.
So whichever quality measure we use, we saw really striking improvements. And this is the strange bit. We reduced our utilisation of resources considerably as well. So we started off with 33 beds for stroke patients in the acute trust, and now we can manage on 19. And we started off with 23 rehabilitation beds, and now we can manage on 15. So not only have we seen those striking improvements in quality, we've seen literally savings of about £1.5 million recurrently.
What John Seddon has created and what subsequently has evolved in that Vanguard space is of enormous importance.
I've never seen another improvement method that actually improves things.
Owen Buckwell is the first man to build a repairs service that delivers to tenants on the day and at the time a tenant wants. Okay? In 2010, he was awarded a prize by Gary Hamill for outstanding leadership. If you don't know this, Gary Hamill is the most expensive consultant on the planet. Owen received his prize in New York. And you would think, wouldn't you, well, the world might pay attention to this pioneer. It's a funny old world, isn't it? But there he is, and he will teach you very happily. Another little observation, you know, you heard the comments about stroke care and beds. You know, I don't understand why NHS people treat a bed as a constraint. You know, why would you have a bed as a constraint in a health system? A health system's there to help people. Therefore, you need as many beds as you need. But you see, it's command and control thinking again. It's cost management again. You know, they think we've got to reduce the number of beds. What did Steve Alder teach you? That when you understand demand And when you understand the value work, and when you look at achievement of purpose from a stroke patient's point of view, you improve the quality of the service, and what happens as a consequence is you use fewer beds. You go manage beds, and you'll use more beds because you're kicking people out that shouldn't be kicked out. And you're not understanding what I talked about earlier, is that the that you listen on the telly and they say, oh, it's these bloody old people, can't get them out of hospital because the social care department's not there. You've heard this, haven't you? Well, there are a few of those, but those are not the major consumers of beds. The major consumers of beds in the NHS are the people for whom the treatment's been ineffective and they're repeat visitors. This is the question, how many patients have you got? And, the leaders of these organisations don't know, and it's because of the way they think. And going back to this, McKinsey's had a big hand in designing the health service. In fact, for all of the restructuring since I can remember from the 1970s onwards, it's a classic command and control design, and it's ineffective. And this is one of the most important things, you see, that you'll learn from today, that when you design a service for effectiveness, the costs will fall. If you focus on efficiency, you'll drive your costs up. Manage costs, your costs go up. Now, I've got advice for you today. We're going to show you lots of things. I know for a lot of people it will fry your brain, okay? I know, you'll kind of, some of you will get emotionally upset at ideas like you can't improve with inspection and targets and all other arbitrary measures will only make you worse, and we don't need budgets, we need knowledge. I know, my advice to you is don't try and take it all in. Just focus on one question. What do I need to study? And where do I need to go? Well, it's two questions, if you like. Because that will get you started. Okay? If you're really clear about where you're going to go and what you're going to study, then you're going to get started. You're going to start unlearning as well as learning. Because the interesting thing about study is you're doing both. You might be tempted from today to just copy some of the designs. I've just given you 3 archetype designs, how you do good stuff. And you might think, oh, that's the thing to do, copy that. No, because if you haven't done the study, you haven't got the knowledge you need, particularly about demand, in order to design properly. So you'll be dead in the water, okay? So just worry about that thing. A lot of your tables, we couldn't get all of our guys here because they're around the world doing lots of things at the moment. But on many tables, there's a Vanguard person. Would you like to put your hand up? Okay, there we are. These people are only at your table to help you address that question. Where do I go? What should I study? Okay. They also have expertise in lots of different systems. So if you want a Vanguard expert who knows your organisation backwards, ask your person who's sitting at your table and they'll find you one. I think there's some people here from police forces. If you're interested, there's a person in the room who's responsible for doing this work in the whole of the Dutch police force. The whole of it, because it makes sense. There's other people here. Mark Radford's here. Where are you, Mark? Okay, I met Mark years ago when he read Freedom from Command and Control, phoned me up and he said, I've been reading this book, it's as though you've been in my organisation. He ran a benefits office down in Kent. The Department of Work and Pensions and the Audit Commission were telling me he had a problem in the back office, and he read the book and he understood the problems in the front office. Correct. He then redesigned his benefits service and went from the worst in the country to the best in about 3 months. And he's now chief executive of that organisation because the councillors down there care about having people who know how to improve things. So he's a source of help too. And he had a fight with Kent because Kent decided they wanted to centralise all benefits processing and get economies of scale. He won the argument because he had the knowledge and the data. And there's other people here. Where's Ian and Neil from Perfect Flow? These guys we met when we were doing housing in the early days with Owen. These guys will help anybody who've got materials understand how to purchase materials on the basis of time, not cost. What they've developed is absolutely brilliant, so there are other sources of help. So that's enough from me for the moment. This starts with study, and the first people that have got to start rethinking the way they control and think about change in their organisations, of course, are the top leaders. So that's where we're going to move to next. Please welcome Barry Ryan.